This might be something that you don't want to hear. It's something that I don't want to hear. But I have to tell myself this often, and I'm telling it to myself more and more these days, and it has been helping. So I want to share it here as well. At a certain point, you're going to have to risk it. And I know that's probably terrifying to hear because it might have triggered something in you that maybe you knew was there or you didn't know was there. Maybe there's something right now going on in your life, something that you know you have to push through to get to something that you really want or to be a version of yourself you want to be, that you know is on the other side of risk, that there is a level of risk, something scary and uncomfortable that you're going to have to experience or face that is going to get you to where you want to be. And yeah, this is not to deny how scary and uncomfortable it might be, how painful, how it might affect you in many ways. Sure, there's many things that could happen in life. We can't control everything. There's only a small amount of control we have in our lives. Some things just happen to us. But the one thing that you can control is how willing you are to take a risk. Now, mind you, not doing anything is also a risk. Staying the same is also a risk. You're not avoiding risk. Even if you might convince yourself that you're avoiding risk by saying, okay, I just won't do anything, or I'll just do the safest thing and stay exactly where you are and what you already know, that's also a risk. So there's a risk no matter what you do. There will always be a risk. A risk is unavoidable. The point is to take control of the only power you have, which is to decide what kind of risk you're willing to take. Now, this isn't to shame anyone, to guilt anyone, to say that one type of risk is better than another. Not at all. Like, I'm not here to encourage any sort of, hustle culture, need to do more, be better all the time. No, do what you need to do for you, right? Do what you want to do. At the end of the day, this is your life, right? You get to decide what to do with it. But the point is to understand that what you want, whatever that might be, is going to require you to risk something. And there might be something right now that you're actually really scared of happening by doing this thing that you really want. And maybe that risk is actually valid. Maybe there is something threatening that your mind can conjure up that is preventing you from pushing forward. And it might be terrifying and it might be very uncomfortable. It might also not be as likely as your anxiety or your mind is making you believe it is. Or maybe it is. Maybe it is likely. Maybe it could potentially happen. And to do what you want to do, to push forward, to ask for what you want, to go after what you want, would risk this thing happening. And at some point, you're going to have to risk it. I know. It's the worst thing to hear, especially if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety, as I am, to know that there is a potential of something going wrong or something uncomfortable or painful happening. The question to ask yourself here is, how much do you want that thing? How much do you actually want it? How important is it to you? And what's the point of it for you? Because the only way to push through and risk whatever it is you need to risk is to do it knowing that this thing that you're risking it for is important. It is some way good for you, right for you, aligned with you. Of course, there are circumstances in life that to go after what we want and to risk those things could put us in a lot of danger. I'm not saying that you should do that, right? I'm not saying that you should go out of your way to put yourself in situations that could harm you, right? Because the point is to give yourself a life that is good for you and enjoyable for you. So that would be counterproductive, right? But I do think at a certain point, you're going to have to risk even those scary and dangerous things. To put it into perspective, right? Every day is a risk in a sense, right? Every day you leave your house, every day you do anything, you're risking something. Every day you get on a plane, you're risking something. Every day that you get into your car, you're risking your safety. Every day that you cross a street, you're risking safety. You're doing something that's posing a risk. Now, because you've done it so many times, it's no longer scary because you've done it and you've shown yourself evidence that it's not that likely or it hasn't happened so far. So it's not, a common thing in your life, right? But if every day that you left your house and you crossed the street, you got hit by a car, you'd be like, okay, well, there's a lot of risk here, so I'm not going to do that anymore. But if it's something that you've never done before, you don't know if there's a risk to it, or you can assume that there is, but you've never actually experienced it to know how likely that risk is, it's going to be terrifying. So your protective mechanism in your body is going to tell you to not do it, right? It's just going to try to protect you preemptively from whatever that risk is. So it's going to tell you, just don't do it. But that means that you're also going to hold yourself back from achieving things that you want, going after things you want, whatever that might be. If we're using the example of crossing the street, you're going to prevent yourself from going to that coffee shop that you really want to go to and do whatever you want to, like right there, or have their desserts, whatever. Obviously, that's just an example, but you're risking something, and on the other side of that risk is something that you want, right? So the point is that you have to understand how much of what you want is worth it for you, worth the risk. So by not risking the potential threat of whatever might be there, you're not going to get what you want. And when you don't get what you want, what is deeply aligned with you and authentic for you, right? I'm not just talking about superficial things, because those things, once you get them, you won't necessarily want them after a while, right? Because they're there to serve something else. Maybe they're there to fill a void. Maybe they're there to make you more confident because you're insecure, whatever. Those are surface level desires, right? They don't last very long. They only satisfy you for a moment. But I'm talking about the things that are deeply authentic and aligned for you, something that you really want, that is something that comes back to you over and over again, but you're holding yourself back because of the risk associated with it. That, if you don't get that, if you don't go after that, well, firstly, you don't get to experience it, which is kind of sad, right? Because you have one life to live. You have a finite amount of time on this planet. To not experience that one thing that you want would be really sad. But also, every time you prevent yourself from going after the things you want, every time you hold yourself back because the risk is so scary, you're ruining your self-trust. You're showing yourself you can't trust yourself, that you can't believe in yourself to do what you need to do, that you are not a trustworthy person in your life, that you will abandon yourself in many ways because you're scared. And again, fear is valid. Like, yes, it is painful, it is uncomfortable, and there are risks that could also create even more discomfort in your life. And sometimes you have to risk them. And sometimes you are actually way more capable of handling those risks than you think you are. Sometimes those risks aren't actually as bad as you imagine them to be. Or sometimes they are, and you figure it out. And you show yourself, wow, I'm actually really capable. Right? So obviously there's a lot of nuance to this. There's no way to predict anything. So you can't go into any risk predicting the outcome or expecting a certain outcome, because then it wouldn't be a risk. Then you would just know. So the risk is the fact that you are uncertain. Yes, that exists. That will always be, that there's no way out of that. However, the more you hold yourself back from things you want because of that risk, that fear of something, the less you'll trust yourself, the less you'll believe you're even worthy of getting the thing you want. And the more you ruin that self-worth with yourself, the less likely you are to go after that thing, to push through the discomfort of the risk and get it. So then you end up stuck, trapped in the same cycles, the same life. And that's not to say that your life currently is bad by any means, right? I'm not encouraging you to feel like you have to always be progressing and growing and changing. Not at all. Like, it's totally fine to enjoy your life as it is right now. That's okay too. But if there's something that you really want, that you feel like you wouldn't truly feel content until you achieved it, because it's just so deeply aligned with you. It's just part of who you are. And the only thing standing in your way is you and the fear you have about this risk. You will always experience a level of discontent that will ruin how you see yourself in your eyes. You will lose respect for yourself after a while too, when you show yourself that you are willing to give up this thing that you want simply because it's scary. And again, yes, life is scary. And also, we deal with fear all the time. We might not register it as something that is scary to us, but deep down, it might be something that is actually very scary. Or maybe not scary to us necessarily, but scary to somebody else. Somebody else would see us doing that thing and be terrified of it. And yet here we are doing it like it's nothing. So I think that's important to also keep in mind, because it gives you perspective on what risk and fear actually look like, especially from different perspectives, right? Different perceptions from other people. Your idea of risk and fear might be nothing to someone else who maybe has already done what you've done. So using them as an example too can be really helpful to help you push through that. But at a certain point, you're going to have to risk it if you really want that thing, especially if you know that the only way to it is over that risk. You're going to have to risk it. And that's a hard truth to swallow. I get it. I have to deal with this with myself all the time. But at a certain point, when you recognize that I'm going to have to just risk this, I'm going to have to push through it, and I'm just going to have to risk it. There's no way out of it. It's actually very freeing. It's actually very liberating to not have another choice in the matter, right? Because like I said earlier, there's going to be a risk no matter what. The risk of staying exactly where you are, discontent with the life you have because it's just not quite aligned with you, or the risk of whatever it is that you think is going to happen happening. There's a risk no matter what. And that's very liberating. It's very freeing. So I would implore you, if you're struggling with something right now that you want to get to, would be deeply aligned with you, but you're not, you're holding yourself back because there's a risk involved, let yourself sit in the feeling of, okay, I'm going to risk it. And I'm accepting that risk and it's going to happen and it is what it is. Sit with that and see what it actually feels like. Because I'm sure at first you'll have resistance. You'll have a lot of fear and discomfort. Definitely. There's no way out of that too. You're going to have to sit through that. At first you'll have that. But I think after a while, the more you sit with that, the less scary it'll be. Because often the thing we fear the most is fear itself. So once you experience the fear, you let your body truly experience it and sit with it, I think you'll realize actually it's not as bad as you thought, or you're actually more willing to take that risk now. So this is just like a little experiment I do for myself often. If there's something that I'm scared of, something I'm trying to avoid, I let myself sit with it in the present, despite not having experienced the thing yet, whatever it might be. I sit with it. Let me pretend that it's actually happening right now. Let me sit with that feeling. And sometimes it can be very painful. So I'm not saying that you should encourage yourself to sit through it if it's really damaging. Get support too, right? Like I have a therapist who I work with a lot, and she helps me through these things as well. She gives me a different perspective. So that's always beneficial. But practice it. Sit in that feeling. See how you actually feel about it if it were to actually happen to you. Because maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe your anxiety, your mind is making it worse than it actually is. That's also very liberating to realize that, oh, I'm actually capable of this. Maybe it won't be that bad. And maybe if it is, I'll figure it out. And that I think is the foundation of self-trust. Believing that whatever happens, however it unfolds, even if it's the worst thing in the world, even if it's painful, terrifying, whatever, I trust myself to figure it out. Because I will. Because I have no other option. And I trust myself to handle things as necessary. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope it gave you a different perspective on the concept of risk. I hope it encouraged you to maybe risk it, whatever that might be for you. And also always take care of yourself. Make sure you're doing what's best for you as well, right? Not encouraging you to put yourself in harm's way without any intention or reason to it. But yeah, if you want to work with me one-to-one, I offer calls and we can just have a chat about these topics. I also have a Substack where I write about these topics in personal essays. Also, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok for the rest of my content. And if you want to learn about any of the other services or offerings I have, feel free to visit my website. Other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.